Hello everyone. Welcome to Painting Crafty. If you're new here, welcome. I'm glad you're stopping by. And for my creative friends who are returning, thanks for coming in and spending a little bit of your creative time with me. I so appreciate you doing so. Today we're going to be working on this sweet little Scarecrow gal, and I'm going to be working on the Arches 100% cotton paper again. I'm going to take some of my own advice. I often say life is short, use some of that good art supplies. And the Arches watercolor paper, I consider some of the good art supplies. I've had that pad for a really long time. I need to get it out and quite honestly use it more often, and especially when doing these faces, because Arches watercolor paper is going to give you those soft blended cheeks and just those beautiful soft blended areas. That's what the Arches watercolor paper is really good at doing, is creating those soft blended areas. Well, I'm going to get started and I'm going to show you some simple steps of how I draw the face. I break it down just a little bit, and then I'm going to be showing you how the watercolor works on the Arches watercolor paper. For those of you who would like to have a tracer, I know not everyone likes to draw. I can do the drawing part and then you can go ahead and do the tracing part. I have a sketchbook membership. I'll list that link down inside of the description box. I so appreciate all my members who have become members and support my channel that way. Well, let's get started and I'll show you how you can create these beautiful little blends on this sweet little Scarecrow. I'm going to first start out with some simple little tricks of how you can create this sweet little face. It almost has a childlike quality. What makes it look like a child quality is if you have this rounder shape and wider face. Now this size of paper, I believe it's a 5x5 is what I'm creating on today. So you're going to want to start with a shape that is rounded at your cheek. So if you think of a U, kind of a rounded shape here, and then she's got this little bit of a break here. It's going to be a little bit of a jawline. So there's her jawline. And then I just came across like this, more of a, not necessarily flat, but a little bit curved. You can also make a little chin here if you would like, just a little tiny one. But by having her face a little wider, a little rounder, it's going to give it more of that childlike quality. Now her eyes are sitting off to the side. I chose to do round eyes, so I will put an eye here and an eye here. That's going to give it more of that childlike quality again. And then her nose, I made it rather small, but that's going to give it that sweet little look too. So it was a candy corn shape, and that's going to be her nose there. Her eyes are going to have a spot here for the color part. And mostly her eye is all color. There's really not any white in there. So I'm just going to have those two areas. Now to do her mouth, it's going to be little hearts on each side. And I'm going to just choose my spots there. And then it's going to come down. You can kind of do it at an angle and then swoop. It's kind of following that same shape as her jawline. So you could come down this way, come down this way, and then I look to see where I am at. And then I'm going to just do this little bit of a smile. And that is basically her face. She's got a small little neck. So I'm going to be coming in here and doing her neck and then laying out her shoulders. And then you can put on any hat that you would like. Now, those who get the tracer, who are in my sketchbook membership, I highly recommend using a light box. You can put your paper down like this, shine it up in a darker room, and then you just put your watercolor paper over the top and trace around the image. You'll be able to see through it just fine. Use a pencil, use light pressure on your pencil so you don't get too dark of a lines for your watercolor, and then use a kneaded eraser, especially if you are using the Arches watercolor paper, because it's a little bit more fragile. You don't want to damage your paper so much, but by using this, you're going to be able to lift some of the color. If you get a little dark, you can lift your color up, so you can go right over it, or you can lighten it even a little bit more. After tracing it, I can just rub my kneaded eraser over my line work. It's going to soften those pencil marks, but I'll still be able to see them, but I won't erase them completely. And this is a great way to lighten your marks. And then your pencil's not going to smear if you use a kneaded eraser versus like a polymer eraser. I love polymer erasers, but to lighten my line work, I want to use a kneaded eraser, or to soften my areas, or especially on this Arches 100% cotton paper, this works great. All right, that's how we begin the beginning of the stages for the drawing, and we're going to jump right on in to the watercolor stage. I'm going to start out by misting my color pans with a little bit of water. That just helps get that paint ready to get out of the boxes so much easier. I'm going to use the student grade and a little bit more professional Paul Rubin colors. There's that peachy color in the student grade set. That's why I'm using that one. I used that peach color and I applied it onto a dry paper. I wanted to make it on her face, but I don't want it in her eyes. It's okay if it goes in her nose a little bit, but I want to paint on top of dry paper because I'm going to have more control. Watercolor always wants to float wherever the paper is wet, so by going right directly on dry paper, it's going to stay put right where I put it. I put that light color on, and then now I'm taking a little bit of the yellow ochre color, which is a step darker than what that peachy color is, and I'm going to put it in the shadow area of underneath her hat, on the edges of her face. I want to leave the center of her face a little bit more light if I can. I'm going to brush that darker color on, and because the paper is wet with the first color, it should kind of wick towards the middle. But if you need a little help, you can always rinse your brush out with clear water, give it a squeeze, and then go in and kind of just tickle that line just a tiny bit, and that should help those paper color blend down towards the center. For her neck area, I'm going to go a slightly darker because I want it to be more of a shadow underneath there. So the chin would be lighter and her neck would be darker. So I'm just brushing in a little bit more rustier color, but same with the golden colors as well. You can kind of see I have that little dirty palette going there of my different colors of my rust and my browns, and I just dab back and forth and create my own colors. As my watercolor dries, it's going to become lighter, so I can add a little bit more shadowing in as it dries. Here I'm putting in a little bit more rustier brown. I'm going to apply it the same way and then squeeze that brush out a little bit from the clear water and then tickle that edge and bring that color around. I'm going to soften it a little bit more and bring just a little bit more towards the nose, so the nose isn't so bright in that area, but definitely lighter than around the underneath her hat and on the side of her face. Since her face and neck are still wet, I need to choose an area that's going to not touch those areas because wherever the paper is wet, the colors want to blend into each other. So I'm going to skip down and do her shirt. And I'm starting out with a bright color blue called cerulean blue and mixing it with some of my greens that I have in my palette to kind of make a soft little turquoise. So I start with the bright blue and then I add the dark color blue called Payne's Gray as my shadow color. And I'm adding that to the outside of her arm, a little bit on the inside. By having those darker edges, it's going to give more depth and roundness to your figure so it doesn't look so flat. My neck has had a little bit of time to dry, so I'm going to risk it and I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of blue and some green in there. It's a little tempting when you're working on these small projects, and I'm only working on one this time. Last time I was doing 2 pumpkins at the same time so I could switch back and forth, and I would know I had plenty of time to dry. This one's a little bit trickier. I get a little impatient, and so I start painting, but it was okay. My colors didn't blend together too much. Now to do her hat, I was going to be choosing to start with the color red ochre first, which is kind of a rusty light orange color. And that's going to be my first layer, and I'm just going to be brushing that in, giving it a chance to dry, and then seeing and adding my shadow colors on the top. You can see here I'm adding the darker color. I went down to the umber and burnt umber, kind of mixed those in my palette. Now I'm creating those darker areas on the outside, and because that area is wet, the colors will wick towards the center. So I'm going to end up with a natural light area and a natural dark area. And then I'm going to repeat the same process on the band of her hat. I'm not going to go underneath yet where her straw hair is coming out. I'm going to paint the straw hair first individually, and then I'll come back and do a little bit of painting in between the straw for her hair of the hat color that goes behind there. You can see where I'm adding the shadow. There would be one underneath the belt there, and you can leave a brighter area at the top where maybe it's catching some light. I decided to go ahead and paint the straw in, even though my hat was still slightly wet. I was okay if a little bit of that rusty color transferred down into the straw hair because the straw was going to be multicolor anyway. But I started out with the bright yellow color called cadmium medium yellow, and I'm starting with that and mixing just a little bit of the yellow ochre in it. The yellow ochre is a lot more opaque, so I didn't want to use that right away. I wanted to start with that brighter shade of yellow and then layer on top of that. I'm using a number 6 Princeton Velvet Touch brush. It's a watercolor brush. I've had these brushes for quite a long time. They're really a good watercolor brush. They've got a nice little spring into it. They keep a nice point. It's a great little brush. I'll have some links down inside of my description box for the items that I use if you might be interested in checking out some of those supplies. After I layered in that brighter color, I went in with the yellow ochre and I laid in just a little bit of that as well on the top. For her shirt, I've already done it in those blues, and I wanted to add a little bit of green to this area just to make a little bit more difference. I was going to be adding a pattern on the front of her shirt, more of a checkered pattern. So this was just the first color I was going to be laying in, was that little bit of that green color. For the small little flowers, I switched brushes and I'm using an 8 long round brush. This has kind of a watercolor belly in the center and then that long pointy tip. It's great for painting small little areas. For the grasses, I was going to be using the same color that I used for her straw hair, that golden colors on there. And then I'm just mixing just a random shade of purple. I have a purple in my set, but I wanted it to be a little bit more red, so I added some red to that. This little brush with this long round, it does carry a lot of water in it, and sometimes when I put it down, it has way too much water in it. I have to squeeze my brush out and then go ahead and lift some of the color. It's kind of deceiving because it has that small little end. You think that it doesn't have a lot in it, but it really does because it has that bigger belly of the brush on the area. I went ahead and made her button the same color as the purple flowers. I like to be able to spread my colors around when I'm doing these small paintings, is to have, if I put that color in one place, I want to bring it down and add it somewhere else. And the little button made perfect sense to be able to add the color there. The color for the belt of her hat, I wanted it to, in the end, to be more of a darker shade of brown, but I'm starting with this rusty underglow color, so I'm adding that right now, and then I'm tapping in a darker shadow line. So now the belt is wet, and I'm going to go ahead and tap just at the edges and around that darker color. And again, wash my brush out, give it a squeeze, and I can tickle those edges and blend that color down to give it a nice little soft blending of color. Now to do her cheeks, this is kind of a fun thing to do. Mix your reds to more of a like a tea consistency. They're not so strong. You just put that color on the outside of her cheek, then rinse your brush out, give it a squeeze, and then kind of tickle those edges and bring that color out. You want the water to kind of be tapped around that area so it's not just solid, but because that paper is going to be wet now, it's going to draw that red peachy color towards the center of her face. The Arches watercolor paper is a great one to do faces on to get those really soft blended looks. Her little collar ruffle, I picked up some light greens. The blue has had plenty of time to dry, so I can add the green in, and it's not going to just blend right onto the shirt and not be noticeable. So as long as the blue paper is dry, when I put the green on in that area, it'll stay separate. Here's where I'm putting in the little bit of a checkered pattern. I made a small little block in the middle and then a block onto each side of that just to create a little bit of a checkered pattern on her shirt. It's a simple way. I'll end up using a little bit more line work to make it pop even a little bit more. Here I was mixing up a little bit of dirty green. So I have my green and I add a little bit of a rusty color to that green, and because the rust and the green are complementary colors, they're going to neutralize each other and become more of an earth green color. And I add that on as the shadow on the ruffle. Here I am adding a little bit more of that Payne's gray to add a deeper shadow. So I'm coming in, outlining maybe the area where I want the shadow, rinsing my brush out again, and then tickling that area where I want that water to be drawn into. It's that layering process. Take your time when you're doing watercolors and slowly build up your color. If you go too fast, too quick, your colors become very muddy and you lose that translucent quality of watercolor. At this stage, she looks kind of scary with her eyes just being white like that, and the center of her face looks a little severe because those eyes are so white. I'm going to work on the hat and then give her face plenty of time to dry before I do her eyes because I want that color to stay right in where that center part, those round circles, to do her eyes. So I really do want to give that face a lot of time to dry so I don't have eyes that kind of the color bleeds all the way across. So it's really important. Give your face a lot of time to dry before you work on the eyes. But she does look a little intense right now. She might even look a little downright angry. But I love her little hat and her little colors. It's all coming together. You can see how I'm adding a little bit more color. And actually on that hat, I went in and added just more water when I added this darker shade. I was hoping to maybe get a few little blooms to come about because I wanted more texture on that hat to make it look really ruggedy. So I'm okay with blooms. I'm not anti-bloom by any means. I love the texture of that where the color kind of is irregular, and I was hoping to get some of those. I could have probably added more water on there actually to try to work it to see if I could have gotten a few more. Now I'm finally adding a little color to her nose, and that's kind of softening it a little bit more. I took some of the reddish orange color and just dabbed that right in there. I used that same reddish color on the patch of her arm too, again, where I added a little bit of that brightness. I wanted to add it some other way, some other place. Now the face has plenty of time to dry. I'm going to be taking that smaller 8 size brush and going into that bright blue color, the sky blue color, and adding that to the blue part of her eye, just to the very top. And while it's still wet, I'm going to be taking a little bit of that color, that Payne's gray color, and just tapping it on the shadow area. So just using the tip of my brush and tapping it on, I chose the left side. And it's okay to put like dot, dot, skip some, dot, dot, skip some, and then not fill it in all the way because your paper's going to be wet. It's going to draw it. So it's better to start out with a few dots of color and then add it as you need to. So now let that blue area dry a little bit. You can still see how I still have a little bit of the bright blue, but you can also see the dark blue. Give those eyes a little chance to dry before we go in and add the green to the bottom. Here I'm just checking my colors again and checking to see what I might need to darken. And I'm going to tap those little brown centers of my flowers. They're kind of like a daisy, purpley daisy color. So I'm just going to be adding a little brown color at the top and not adding a whole lot of detail to the flowers, but they sure look cute sticking out of her hat. Again, I'm just using that dirty part of the pan, mixing my colors as I go. I like doing that style of painting where it's a small area and I'm just mixing and blending, and it kind of harmonizes my picture because I'm using all the similar colors and they're all there. I'm just using different degrees and shades and contrast of the same colors. Softening those same areas where I go in, wash my brush out with a little water, give it a squeeze, and then tickle those areas to add a little bit more water to that area so that color will draw in towards the dry part of the paper. To add the difference for her band of her hat, I wanted to make that color as more of like a chocolatey brown, so that's why I'm picking up those darker shades of brown. But even having those eyes done, don't you think she looks a lot less intense? Not as scary, just even having a little bit of blue in those eyes. I'm going to make them colorful, more colorful by adding some green. But now I'm just kind of working on that belt. Now I'm going to give that a little chance to dry before I do the buckle because I'm going to go in with the golden colors, a little lighter shade around the buckle. So I want to give that belt area some time to dry before I do that. Now that the straw of her hair is fairly dry, I'm going to go in with my smaller brush, that long round 8 brush, and I'm going to come in and paint just where the hat is, that you can see it peeking through the straw of her hair. That little brush works great for that, to be able to go in those small areas, just tapping in a little bit of color. Again, you need to be aware if you're using that brush, it holds a lot more water than what you think. It's a great brush though. Now you can kind of see where it looks like the hat is going behind. For those who get the tracer, you will get 3 different sizes. You're going to get this size that fits this 5x5. I'm going to give you kind of a mini size one, which makes great for like tags or fussy cuts or something like that. If you like to do journaling, that works great for that size. And then I'll give you one size bigger because you might want to make a 5x7 card or something like that. These are make little great framed pieces to hang up and have. I always encourage everybody, get your artwork out and show it and not just leave it in a book or just stacked in a box. Display it, put it in a little frame, and have it out for a while. And now I'm taking that light shade of green, that bright shade of green that I first started out with our collar. I'm tapping that into the bottom, and then I'm taking a darker shade of green more towards the area of called hooker's green, that little darker green, and I'm tapping that at the bottom of the green area. So she's got a bright blue eye with the dark, and then this green, bright green with a little bit of the darker area. It's such a small area, you just need to tap those colors in very carefully. And I'm going to let that all dry. And if you end up with color that comes too far out of your eye, let that eye dry, let that paper dry, and then you can come in with some clean water and just tickle that area softly, try to lift that color. I have to do that on this particular gal. I had a little bit of green that went too far, and on the other eye I had a little bit of blue that went a little too far, and I was able to lift it, and it looks fine. Here again, I'm just checking my colors to see if I need to add a few more shadows or add another color to my layers. I'm going to dirty up that red a little bit by adding some brown to it to create that brown shadow. Her nose needs to have a shadow on one side too, so I end up doing that eventually. I wait till the very end to do that. I almost forgot to put that in there. I don't know what it is, but often I'm painting along and then I think I'm done and I might go ahead and dry it and then I realize I forgot to add something on it. But that's the good thing. You can always go back and add a little detail if you need to. Even after you add the pen work, if you're using the Micron pens, once they're dry, they're permanent, so you can add watercolor over the top if you need to. Not all pens are permanent, but the Micron pens are. Now I'm going to be going ahead and laying in the color for the belt buckle, and I'm going to use the same colors that I'm using for the straw of her hair. Those are the colors that I'm going to use for the buckle. Again, it's a way to kind of bounce that color around a little bit on my picture. So I have some of it up in the wheat area, in her hat, and in the buckle, and then in her hair. So I have it a little scattered around. It makes a nice composition for your paintings. You don't have to paint them the way I do, of course. Use the colors you like that spark you joy. So maybe you want yours more colorful or not as colorful. You can create these any way you want to. As a matter of fact, once you have them drawn, especially in the sketchbook membership, I always encourage people to get out your acrylic paints. Try to paint her in acrylic. Do a little mixed media piece. Add some paper to her. She would be darling done that way. There's lots of ways to create this little gal. Because once you have it drawn, you can do use the mediums that you like to do. And that's where I was kind of lifting some of that color. Now I'm coming up to the top of that blue area and lifting a little bit of that blue color too. It's nice to know that you can be able to fix watercolor paint a little bit. Sometimes people look at as watercolor as being one of those little fussy pieces that you can't really change. And I have to admit, it is a little harder to change watercolor versus acrylic paint, but it's a completely different look, and I just love it. I never thought I would like to do watercolor. Matter of fact, I didn't really start watercoloring until about 5 years ago. And I started out with Crayola markers. That's what I used for my watercolor. I just rubbed my Crayola markers on some plastic, got it wet, added some water, and then used that as watercolor paint. So that's where I began. And then I've worked my way up to doing this watercolor, and it really has turned out to be a favorite of mine because I love the idea of just being able to take out a piece of paper and a box of colors and a couple paintbrushes, and I can start creating. That's great. It's very transportable too, so even going on vacation or painting outside, it's a great way to take paint and go. Here I'm trying to add some freckles. The first time around I used that small little brush, but I thought that the line quality didn't turn out or my dot quality didn't turn out very well. So now I'm trying to use the stylus. And the best way I found is if you want to use a stylus, is just to go ahead and add more water to the paint, get a little bit of a puddle, dip your stylus in it, and then tap it on. And that seemed to work. I messed with this a lot longer than I needed to, but I really wanted it to work, so I kept on trying different things, and that's what I found that worked the best. For the eyes, there was one more final detail. I used that long brush, that long 8 with that nice little point on the end, and I watered down some darker brown, and I did a little tiny, like a sepia tone circle area around the eye. Now that's just optional if you feel more confident using a marker. If you have a sepia marker, they do make them in that color in the Micron pens. I might try to buy some of those. There's been different times where I wish I had another pen that wasn't black, but more of the sepia tone in the Micron pens, and they do make them, and I think I'm gonna have to buy myself one that you could do those little tiny kind of irregular circles around the eyes using a Micron pen instead of using the paintbrush. But I used the paintbrush for her smile and those little circles, and I got it to work. It's just a matter of how much pressure you put on it, not going too hard, just going very lightly pressure around those areas. I check my colors one more time after my painting has dried, and then strengthen any areas that I need to add more darker shadows to. And once I have that part done, then I'm going to move right on in to the pen work. For the pen work, I'm going to be using my black Micron pen in the nib size 01. I had already done the lettering beforehand, and I believe I did that in the 01 as well. That's really optional as far as adding the lettering. You can either add it in or you can leave it plain, however you want to do it. But I really did like how the lettering is tucking underneath those areas where it's kind of lettered around the little scarecrow. I like the way it turned out. This one, I'm just using that very much that sketchy style that I like to do, where I like to stop and start and make irregular lines. Nothing is exact. It's not like a color book style where it all is got an outline around it. I might double up on my lines. I might add a few little dots. It's very much a broken hand sketch look, but that's the way I like to do mine. I did go in and add a few little white lines using my Jelly Roll white pen. I added 2 little dots on the right side of each of the eyes, and then went in and did a little bit of scribbly bits here and there to add some highlights to this little gal. I always like leaving the white kind of like glitter, where a little bit goes a long ways, and the less the better, because it's going to end up being more like a sparkle. Well, let's take a look at what this gal looks like sitting on the shelf in my studio. And here she is. Hopefully with today's tutorial, you learned a few tips and tricks of how to draw a face that has those childlike qualities, as well as how Arches watercolor paper can help you create those soft watercolor blends. If you enjoyed this tutorial, here's a couple more you might want to check out, as well as a clickable link that leads right to my Ko-fi shop. You can check out my sketchbook membership there. Leave me a comment, give me a thumbs up. It really does help my channel grow. Well, thanks for joining me today, and hopefully you'll come back and join me again, and perhaps next time you'll paint right along with me.